Welcome to Monday Morning Moments. We're entering a new podcast series called The Path to Peace, and it's based on a book project that I'm working on right now. It's a very important project, a very special project to me. And the name of the title, the working title, is called The Path to Peace, 10 Verses to Develop Faith Over Fear. And we're not sure if we're going to limit it to just 10. There are plenty of verses in the Bible that talk about fear and how we should not fear and have faith over fear. And so we may keep just a top 10. We may expand that. But I'm working on that project right now. And so we thought we'd do a podcast series and maybe highlight some key verses that you can rely on to have faith over fear. And the reason this is such a special project to me is I've been working in the area of sports performance and sports psychology coaching for many years, and I often work with athletes on foundational keys to have faith over fear in key moments, and how do you step up in big moments in an athletic contest. I've also coached executive leaders and entrepreneurs to help them not only on leadership, but also in performance and having faith over fear. And the foundational truths behind each of the principles I share with them are based on foundational truths in the Bible that God gave us. And so that's why this is such a special project for me, and how I wanted to share that with you today and also in the weeks to come about these key verses. And the first verse that we're going to start with for today is 2 Timothy 1:7. It's such a special verse for me, and it's something that's foundational. And I often share this with athletes and people that I speak to, but also it's been a special verse for me as well. And 2 Timothy 1:7 says, "For God has not given us a spirit of fear, but of power and of love and a sound mind." And it's so important when we think about that God has not given us the spirit of fear. I think a lot of times when we're fearful, we can step into that moment and think that, well, God gave us this feeling or this feeling of fear, or blame Him for feelings of fear that we have, either based on circumstances we're facing or choices that we've made, or just in the spirit of living in a broken world. We're going to have fear, and we're going to have feelings of fear. We're going to have challenging circumstances that come against us. And so we've got to make sure to understand that God didn't give us that spirit of fear, but He gave us some other things, and we'll talk about that in just a few moments. But it's important to understand, well, where does fear come from in our lives? How does this anxiety just raise up in me, and the depression, where does that come from? And I think a lot of times fear comes from culture. And I'm going to give you a couple of C's that talk about where fear comes from. But we can just have fear just from the culture or the world. If you think about notifications that come to your phone or your Apple Watch or your computer, it's always breaking news. Even if we're watching a newscast on TV, it's breaking news. And most of the time, it's bad news, unless our favorite player is getting traded to our team and it's going to be a breakthrough moment for our team. Most of the time, the breaking news that we're hearing about is something that's fearful or challenging, and it could be halfway around the world, and we have no control over what's going on, but the world tells us to be fearful of that, or the world tells us to be fearful of these things, and we get distracted from the foundation that's really in our lives that we can have faith. Another way that fear comes into our lives is through circumstances. So these could be our own choices or just circumstances that happen living in this world. And when we face those circumstances, we get distracted, and we maybe stop moving forward in what we're doing because we're facing a challenging circumstance. I've seen this with athletes a lot of times, where a bad moment happens in a game, and they're thinking every moment was going to be perfect. And then a bad shot or a bad event happens, or a bad outcome happens, and they just stop and are stalled. And I think we can face that in our lives when we face challenging circumstances. But fear can creep up when we have a negative circumstance or a challenging circumstance happen in our lives, and fear just starts to creep in, and we start to project forward about what this circumstance might do to future moments in our lives, and we're not present in what we're currently doing. And so that's another way that fear can enter our mind and enter our lives. And then I think just fear comes from the enemy. We have to know that we face an enemy. And Jesus talked about this in the Bible so often, that the enemy is coming to steal, kill, and destroy. And we'll talk about that verse in a later podcast. But there's an enemy who's facing you, and there's a spiritual warfare that's going on in your lives. And that enemy wants to steal your joy, to kill your purpose, and destroy your impact. And it's really important that we understand that we're facing that, but we have a conqueror in Jesus who can help us through that moment and help us to find joy in life, to discover our purpose, and to have impact with our lives. But to know that there's an enemy that's out there, and even if you're not a Christian or you're not coming at this from a faith perspective, you understand in competition or in anything, in sports, business, or life, that there's an enemy who's trying to keep you from making an impact in what you're doing, whether that's leading a team or whether that's leading on your team in a sports contest. You understand about facing competition, who wants to steal your joy and kill your purpose and destroy your impact. We have to understand that that's where fear can creep into our lives when we have and face enemies and face challenges and face competition in that world. So fear, it causes us to be distracted. And I think that we have to understand that we can get distracted when fear enters our lives. Fear can also cause us to be disillusioned. In other words, we become fearful and thought everything was going to be great, and then we lose our sense of faith, and we become disillusioned at everything, and we lose sense and sight of our goals and our purpose, and we become disillusioned maybe in people, in God, in our purpose, and things that we thought were going to work out great, and we're, again, projecting forward and not present in the current moment. And then we can be discouraged. Fear can cause us to be discouraged in the things that we're stepping forward in. And so we can't get disillusioned or distracted or discouraged in our lives. And we have to make sure about the truth of this verse, that God did not give us a spirit of fear, but what did he give us? He gave us power, and he gave us love, and he gives us a sound mind. Some translations of this verse talk about self-control and discipline. And knowing that God has not given us a spirit of fear can be a game changer in your life. It's the first step to naming and identifying our fears and redirecting our focus on him and what his spirit wants to give us, what his spirit wants to give you. So instead of looking down, and we need to look up, and we need to make sure that we're focusing our mind on his power and his strength, and knowing it can help us prevail in the midst of any challenging moment that we face. And then we start to look around and we feel his love, and we begin to share that with other people. And we set the example for what a spirit-filled life looks like. And then we also begin to take steps forward in faith, knowing that we've been given a sound mind and the discipline and self-control to make wise choices about what we think, say, and do based on his wisdom and based on that discerning spirit that he has given us. And so he's given us that power, love, and a sound mind. He's given that to you, and you can decide to channel your thoughts and renew your mind to his thoughts and his wisdom and his love, and go out and live with purpose. We can conquer our anxiety when we apply this verse in our lives, and it's such a powerful verse. It's a foundation of renewing our mind to truth and replacing our fear with faith. It's 2 Timothy 1:7. For God has not given us the spirit of fear, but of power, love, and a sound mind. And I'm encouraging you and challenging you just to walk out in that verse today. It's part of the path to peace, to know that we have his love and his power and his mind to make wise choices on where we focus our attention and renew our mind to his truth and his spirit. Walk out in that verse today in anything that you're facing right now, and it'll help you to give that faith over fear. It'll also help you to make the most of the moments in your life.